Hello, I hope this update finds you safe and well in these challenging times. My name is Nikki Bentley. I'm a partner in the EY Financial Services Law team, and today I'm going to give you an update on the new licensing regime that has come into effect for foreign fund managers wanting to do business in Australia. To briefly recap on the Australian licensing regime, it requires anyone carrying on a financial services business in Australia to hold an Australian financial services licence unless an applicable exemption is available. Inducing people in Australia to use your financial services is deemed to be carrying on a financial services business. Under the old regime, ASIC had granted 2 licensing relief for foreign financial service providers. There was the sufficient equivalence relief, which was a very broad licensing exemption, enabling managers to distribute their services and to undertake investment management activities if they came from jurisdictions that were sufficiently regulated as determined by ASIC. The exemption involved lodging documents with ASIC under a streamlined process and complying with some minimal ongoing licence conditions. The second relief that was available was a much more limited relief known as the limited connection relief, and that provided an exemption from inducing activities if they were not conducted in Australia. There were no notification or lodgement requirements to ASIC in order to rely on that relief. Both those reliefs have now been repealed, subject to a transition period. The new licensing regime has 2 key elements. There is a foreign Australian financial services licence and a very limited funds management relief. A foreign manager that is authorised by an overseas regulatory authority that is recognised by ASIC as being a sufficiently equivalent regulatory regime will be eligible to apply for a foreign licence. ASIC has expanded the list of sufficiently equivalent regimes to now include some of the European jurisdictions, including Denmark and France, and some of the Canadian provinces. The online application form and portal and licensing guides have now been updated to allow the foreign fund managers to apply for the new licence. The application process for a foreign licence is intended to be more streamlined than our standard licence application process, and a foreign fund manager will be exempt from certain obligations that apply to the local licence holders, including the financial requirements and key competencies required for responsible managers. However, a foreign licensee is still subject to a number of obligations imposed on our licensees, including around conflicts of interest and risk management obligations. The newly introduced funds management relief will replace the limited connection relief from 31st of March 2022. This limited licensing relief will permit foreign fund managers to provide funds management services to professional investors in Australia. The licensing relief only covers inducing people to use those financial services. So if you are otherwise providing financial services to Australian investors, then you will need to obtain a licence or rely on another exemption. The conditions of relief contain similar conditions to the sufficient equivalence regime, including lodgement of documents with ASIC. So in relation to next steps, if you have existing Australian clients and you are relying on the sufficient equivalence regime, you have 2 years to transition to the new regime. You need to be assessing your activities in Australia to confirm whether you can rely on the funds management relief or other licensing exemptions. Most managers will need to apply for a foreign licence, and I encourage you to lodge your applications early in the transition period. ASIC's service charter states that they aim to complete 90% of applications within 240 days. Given the expectation that there will be a number of foreign fund managers applying for the licence, we anticipate that those timeframes will increase during the transition period, and we encourage you to apply early so that you don't get to the end of the transition period without obtaining your licence. If you're thinking about entering the Australian market, then you'll need to determine whether you can initially rely on the funds management relief or other applicable licensing exemptions. You may need to consider whether you can be appointed as a corporate authorised representative of a local licensee, perhaps on an interim basis until you complete the licence application process. But you will need to ensure that you are licensed or relying on an exemption before you commence providing financial services to Australian wholesale clients. If you are a super fund who has allocated money to an offshore manager, then you need to be engaging with the offshore managers to understand how they're going to comply with the new licensing regime and ensure you have comfort that they will be able to comply before the end of the transition period. If you're looking to allocate to new managers, then part of your due diligence will need to be understanding how they're going to comply with their obligations and understanding the timeframes that they'll need to comply before they can receive allocations. That's been a very quick update on the new licensing regime, and I hope you found it of use. I encourage you to begin considering your plans for compliance under the new regime sooner rather than later. Thank you for your time.